Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Jessica. I'm the content lead at Globe Content Studio, which is the Globe and Mail's content marketing division. And today we are kicking off a new season of Studio Sessions. Studio Sessions is our live chat series about all things content marketing. And for today's episode, titled Everyone is a Content Creator, we're joined by our guest, Mariam Zohouri. Mariam Zohouri knows how to get people excited. It's why industry leaders in tech and politics and social impact have been trusting her to shape their brands, as a writer and an editor, but as a content marketer. She translates complex ideas into these polished, memorable stories that really attract and engage and transform passive audiences into fierce champions. Mariam and I connected through the growth marketing class, Grow Class, and have since had a number of chats about all things content marketing and just kind of the working world in general. So welcome, Mariam.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super, super excited to have this conversation and to share some of our juicy insights.
I know. I want to dig right into the title because, of course, we are identifying here as content marketers, but we've titled this series that Everyone is a Content Creator. And the reason I did that is because I think that there's a lot to tease out when it comes to the nuances between content creators and content marketers. Have they become the same thing? Is there still a division between the two? What are your thoughts?
Oh, that is a really great question. And I really love the discussion that we had the first time we chatted about it too. I think first starting with a good definition of content marketing, with for me at the crux of it is generally organic content, because the moment you go into paid, that's paid. Organic content that serves to engage your audience, ideally to elevate your brand, whether you're an individual or an organization or a business. And that can be anything from blogs to video content, to audio content, to podcasts. Copywriting can be an element of content writing where you're trying to specifically get the audience member to take an action, whether that's to like click a button, add to cart, or anything else. But when you think of content marketing that vein, and then you look at what a lot of content creators are doing nowadays, where they might have started creating content for fun. They were sharing their personal opinions online. So I'm thinking of the traditional Instagram influencer or even people on TikTok. And over time, they might have built their audience to a point where they have a loyal following that listens to the advice that they're sharing with the public, and that will take actions based on those recommendations. And that is in and of itself content marketing too. The difference, I think, is that these creatives often started well in the creative space where they were creating things themselves. And I do think they do a really good job at staying on trend. But I do think the lines are blurred, and I think it depends entirely on the person creating the content. And I will say that marketing too, and I wrote this in the LinkedIn post where I shared that I was participating in this conversation, it can feel like a rather gated community, which is funny because I think it's one of the industries where you can jump into it with little to no background and just learn as you go. But there's a lot of jargon. So when someone says content marketing and they talk about marketing for an audience at the top of the funnel, if you're new to that, you're like, I have no idea what that means. But then if you're a content creator and you've promoted a lotion or skinwear, or you're trying to send people to a petition, that's what you're doing. You're engaging an audience in the awareness stage, which is top of funnel, where they have no idea what you're talking about, but because they trust you, they want to listen to what you have to say and you're going to educate them. So to answer your question in a short sentence, yeah, I do think the lines are blurred, and I don't think there's as much of a difference, except if you know how to talk about it the way a marketer talks about it.
Yeah, it's so interesting because there's totally, and so sorry, my phone is going off because it's just a popular time, but there was once a time where content creators were more so referred to as influencers, right? Like it was a different sort of identifier. But nowadays, many influencers would much rather be referred to as content creators because they want the label to reflect the work that they do that is so much like content marketers. It's the strategizing and the planning of content. It's the development and production of it. It's the editing often. As they get bigger, sure, they might have teams, but at the start, it's you sitting in your room editing your own videos, right? Or articles or what have you. And then also possibly being responsible for the brand partnership side of it when you do start to work with brands and move into that paid side as well. My approach to differentiate, because I still believe that there's a difference, is that the content creators of the world tend to be producing for their own personal brand, whereas content marketers are often producing for a public brand. Now, that might be, like a public or a private corporation, but it's not, me, Jessica Robinson, producing my own content for my own Jessica Robinson brand. It's me doing it through Globe Content Studio for a variety of partners. Because I think even in the paid space, you have content creators in the more traditional influencer vein who are doing paid partnerships with sponsors. So I don't even think you can differentiate it based on the organic or paid anymore. To me, it's really about, are you doing this for a personal or for a public brand? But like you said, it's pretty close these days.
100%. And if I may build off of what you said too.
Please, yeah.
If you're a business and you're looking to market your business, you always want to identify your niche. So there's that saying of, if you're trying to talk to everyone, you're talking to no one. And really great. So I also own my own freelance business as well too, where I've done freelance writing and editing and content marketing for a variety of brands. Right now I'm a copywriter with the business Properly, which is reimagining real estate. But even with Properly or any of the clients that reached out to me, because I'm always actively sharing my writing on LinkedIn, which is the main platform I use, and I speak really openly about the things I'm quite passionate about. So I do care a lot about social impact. I care a lot about supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, although I don't call myself an expert in that space at all. And I generally have what I would call a very educational but entertaining way of speaking, which can be appealing for brands that really care about driving engagement with their audience really quickly, even if it's a complex topic. People have sought me out for that. So I agree with what you're saying. And I think that if a content creator wants to then take what they've learned and developed and those skills they've developed as a content creator, they could easily apply it and then become a content marketer if they get a good grasp of like, okay, who is my niche audience? Who are the best people that I know to communicate with? What are the brands that would align with that? And then go on from there. But that is a very good point that you've made too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's funny, you mentioned earlier, you're not necessarily getting a degree in content marketing these days. That's not something that's out there, but having done the work of creating content is how you build up that capacity to work in this space. So when it comes to working with personal brands versus company brands, what advice do you feel like applies across the board when it comes to content creation?
What applies across the board is be very mindful of what the person that is hiring you or is your boss or is your manager or is the company you're working with, what their goals are, and what they believe about the audience. Get that on paper. And then find out what the actual audience is like, what their needs are, what the individual or the business is offering actually can fit into their lives in a meaningful way, ideally to solve a pain point. And try to lean into as much research that has been done on the customers and audience or real conversations as possible. And if that doesn't exactly align with what this individual who wants to present themselves as a thought leader or this business has presented as how they want to communicate or the kind of content they want to develop or where they want to be sharing that content, be confident in challenging it because you're using data about the actual people you want to speak to. So always root the work that you're doing in your audience, and don't assume that just because you might fall into the category of the target audience that you know everything. So just like, if you're speaking to everyone, you're speaking to no one. If you're catering just to yourself, there's a very good chance that you might not be catering to anyone else. And that applies whether you're writing content from the perspective of an individual that wants to talk to others, or you're speaking from the perspective of a business or an organization. So that means maybe you have to cater your language. Maybe you are a business and the people on your team have advanced degrees in the subject you're working on. I'm thinking of a lot of organizations that work in STEM, or SaaS businesses, so software as a service. But if your target audience, even in the business to business space, if your target audience is someone like a manager from another organization that knows that they need your service, but they don't talk about it the way you with the technical expertise talk about it the way that your audience wants to talk about it too, and to always iterate. So you need to be sharing content on a consistent basis, and then you need to be evaluating what resonates and what doesn't, and then iterating based on that too.
Amazing. I want to dig into the iterating part, because there's this really persistent feeling, I feel, for me anyway, as a content marketer, that your content needs to be everywhere. And like, gone are the days where you can just take that one blog post or that one video and immediately post it on all the channels and it's going to do well. You have to tailor your content for each of these different platforms that all have their own sort of, not just algorithms, but social contracts almost. The ways in which people seek out, consume, and engage with content really differ when you're comparing Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or a blog or a website. So how can content marketers determine which platforms are the right ones for them? And how do you evaluate if it's working?
Yeah. So I'm laughing because I'm gonna get a little salty and I'm gonna get a little sassy, but I don't mean it that way, and I don't mean to throw any shade onto anyone. But only post on a platform and publish on a platform, whether it's a social media platform or anything else, if you know that you can actually dedicate the time to it. There is nothing more depressing, and I said this to you before, Justin. If you go, you find a business and you go to their website and you're like, oh, this looks amazing. I'm curious to check out their Twitter. And then there's like one tweet from 5 months ago. Their bio is just like a random link to an article that was published 2 years ago. And it's just very confusing. And maybe even the brand identity doesn't match what's on their website because they haven't touched their Twitter in so long that maybe the team even forgot it existed. It's not worth it. The idea that if you're on more of these platforms, you can broaden your reach to a greater audience is only true if you can actually invest the time to take advantage of how these algorithms work, which for almost every single platform is about consistent posting. And I'm not going to try to act like there's a specific schedule for any of them because it depends entirely on your audience and when they're online and what they like to see and how much they want to engage with your stuff too. But that's the first thing. If you don't think you can invest the time on a platform, please don't go on it. It will do more damage to your brand. The other thing too is that if you are going to go on another platform, make sure you're using it the way that you presented. That was beautiful, Jess. You want to be using it the way that it is meant to be used. TikTok and Instagram engage with their audiences in a different way. On TikTok, a lot of the times, if you're going to be sharing something, you're doing it with the intention and with the understanding that someone isn't going to suddenly click on your profile and then go to your website unless you've shared a product and it's gone viral and they really want to check it out. But making sure that you've done your research, which might only happen after you've posted a few times and it's based on how your audience has engaged with your content, and then iterating based on that. So going, okay, people are engaging with a lot of our content on TikTok. We're doing a good job here. We're going to stay here. The other thing I would say for sure is that it is important to have a platform that you definitely own and another one to amplify it, because if you're not amplifying the content that you have, no one is going to see it. But again, that does not mean, okay, then I have to be on absolutely everything.
Definitely. Our head of studio, Sean, loves to say that great content isn't great if no one sees it. You need that amplification. You can't ignore the world of social media altogether and just, really devote the time to your blog, because your blog might be great, but if nobody knows it's out there, or your newsletter or whatever it is in your kind of owned channel, which I agree is vital, because you don't always want to be at the whim of whatever the algorithm feels like that day. But yeah, you can't rely on it solely. It has to be part of an omni-channel sort of approach, that network, which is a total marketing speak word. But yeah, that idea of having these different ways to bring your audience together and giving them different types of information in those different places. And I want to poke at the TikTok kind of example that you gave there, because of course, TikTok is what we've sort of started calling like a closed loop system, which means it's not designed to drive toward outbound links that take you to an external site. It's really about producing content that users in the app enjoy and want to follow, but ultimately then scroll past. So how can a content marketer who is likely either trying to supply additional education and information on a product or service, or ultimately drive to that external page, navigate building a presence on this sort of a platform?
Yeah, and there's a really excellent marketer who I follow for tips on this kind of thing called Amanda Natividad. Absolutely adore her. Her Twitter presence is phenomenal, and she has a really great newsletter. Just a little shout out to her there. The reality is that if you're posting content that doesn't align with how the platform is meant to be used, you will be penalized, and then people will see your post less. By penalized, I mean if the algorithm starts to notice that people aren't engaging with your content and that it isn't the kind of content that is most engaged across the platform, they're going to push it up to the feeds a lot less often. So so that's the first piece is, if you want the content to perform well, first of all, you need to adapt to the platform. And the second piece is that it's actually not a bad thing if the platform platform is closed loop. A platform like TikTok is incredibly addictive. It's really easy to spend an excessive amount of time there. So if you
Guilty.
I had to get rid of it because I spent like a minimum of 45 minutes every time I was on it. It was not good. Which I realize is at like the lower scale of how long someone can be on there, which says a lot. But you know what? We've lived through a pandemic. We show ourselves grace. It's fine. But if you're developing content there that people are engaging with a lot and they love seeing and they keep going back to your page or they're staying on your page and they're looking through everything, they're going to develop a loyalty towards your brand and have a sense of enthusiasm to engage with your brand that is going to be very valuable when you do decide that you're going to try to sell to them. Or after they've engaged with your content enough that they do finally decide that they want to learn more about you. But TikTok is meant to be a platform that offers what I believe is creative escapism and entertainment. So you want to lean into that. And it's a really unique way to develop that relationship. So, and also see, does that align with your brand also? If you're a brand, although I have seen honestly, even a number of therapists who post a lot of content on there and they share their tips in a way that's really condensed and really easy for people to process in like 1, 2, 3. If you can format your content in that way, then absolutely take advantage of it. And it's a really personalized way to connect with your audience. Yes, there's a lot of noise because people can scroll and see maybe like 100 videos in the span of 20 minutes. But when they're looking at your video, they're just engaging with you. So it's more of a relationship building platform than it is one to drive action to go on your website, for example.
Yeah, and it's so funny because even the psychology of the fact that your video is full screen on TikTok, right? Which of course we
Yes.
know is why Instagram Reels introduced full screen, but it's that total immersion for those 15 or 30 or 60 seconds. All you're consuming is that brand in that video and that story, and it's a privilege. So what are you going to do with that time when you're engaging with that audience? I love that, and I like the idea of thinking about it as relationship building, because ultimately, if you can create a relationship with your audience, what you're essentially doing is forming the basis for community. And to me, more and more, the hallmark of a successful brand is one that fosters community. So I'd love to get your take. Where does content marketing come into play for community growth?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it off of my comment about relationship building, and that is what it's all about. And I would like to also just give like a little shout out to all the content marketers out there and writers, copywriters who are developing content where it can be a little bit difficult sometimes, not all the time, to quantify the impact of the work that you've done. And you might have to be consistently justifying why you're spending several hours editing a blog, because it does impact the voice that people are going to perceive and that are going to recognize about your brand. So community building is about developing that sense of trust with your audience. But where I think it differs from other traditional realms of content marketing, is that you also want to be amplifying members of the community too. For example, if you have a product that is either directly or indirectly serving an audience with a particular need. So one thing that I can mention is standing desks. When I was looking up some information about how long I should be standing and sitting at my desk, one of the first results was from a university, and the information was a little bit dense. But then the second one was actually for a standing desk company. And when I looked at their website, they actually had a series of blogs that spoke about this. And on their social media, they were sharing comments from their community members and amplifying other community members that were back specialists. I don't know what the formal name for a doctor that does that is, but those people. And then I'm like, okay, this is like a community of people who get me. They're sharing information that's speaking to a problem that I have that is directly related to their product. So I'm going to turn to them not just when I want to buy their product, but when I want to engage with other people who know what I'm going through and understand what I'm going through, and amplify other people. It does not penalize you or your brand or yourself as a thought leader if you take time to amplify other folks or other businesses that actually align with yours. Ideally, you don't want to be amplifying direct competitors, but that's been one of the things that's helped me grow my audience the most on LinkedIn, which is where I've gotten the most clients and the most opportunities, is just because I amplify other people who I think are great. And I do it with no intention that they're going to do anything back. So amplify people, build trust, because a community is about a trusting group of folks who know that they can come to you for fixing a pain point, getting advice on a specific area that is either directly related or indirectly related to your service or your product or your mission.
Yeah, the idea of content that uplifts other brands, other creators, that
Yeah.
that's a way of creating community. It can sometimes feel a little counterintuitive, right? Like, oh, I should be taking the time and the energy that it takes to produce content to uplift myself, to tell my own story. But audiences see through when your work is that self-serving, when you can use your connections in a space that makes sense for you to be speaking on, like you uplifting the voice of a person who has nothing to do with your realm of product or service. It's going to come across as a little awkward because it just doesn't make sense to the audience. But if you can do exactly like you said, connect standing desks with the chronic illness community that is enormous on social media and on the internet in general, because that's a group of people constantly searching for support and answers and new things to try. What a great way to bring people together to the same place, which is ultimately what community is people coming together. Your content can be what they come together over, which is amazing.
100%, 100%.
Yeah. We have a few questions from the audience, so I want to make sure that we have time to get to them. I'm going to start with this one. When writing copy to sell a product, what are some of your top tips for coming up with really engaging story ideas, especially when the dreaded blank page list is staring into your soul?
It really does stare into your soul, doesn't it? So always go back to your audience. Always go back to your customers. This is a best practice that I learned and really honed over the course of my time at Grow Class. I have absolutely no shame plugging or promoting them just because they're absolutely so fantastic. And I actually think they might even have a cohort. I'm not getting paid to promote this. They're just fantastic. Cohort open, check it out. But you always want to be leaning into your audience and their stories and your customers and their stories. By that, I mean, do you have any testimonials that you can be leaning into to take a look at how people are talking about your product or your service or the problem that you're trying to solve as an organization? Can you go online and look up the subject or the industry that you're working in or that your business is in, and then see if there are any news articles that have recently come out so that you can comment on it and then take advantage of the hype that is building around this subject and be a part of the conversation and present yourself as a leader. And going back to the story, this is something that I'm like, sort of, sharing your mission and your why is important. But if you can, because that's something most businesses do have a clear handle on, or if you're a CEO, your CEO has a really clear handle on why they've done this, or if you're a thought leader, the thought leader definitely has a clear handle on why they want to be one. I hope they really should if they want to be a thought leader. But then try to reframe that not as, for example, I am a copywriting expert and my introduction, my bio, that would be a horrible piece of marketing, but I have 10 years of experience and I've worked with all these leaders in these spaces, and I help translate complex ideas so that into simple language so that it resonates with an audience and gets them to act. How can I focus on the audience that needs that? So how can I reframe that into a piece of content that talks about a small business that has been investing hours of their time into churning out content to try to get people to hear about their business because it solves a problem for them. Let's say you sell vegan ice cream. My partner can't have dairy, so that is something that I am still trying to get him to commit to because it would be really great. But vegan ice cream, so you know that you're solving a problem for people who maybe grew up with a sweet tooth, who doesn't love ice cream, but they just can't handle it. But you cannot get your message to resonate with your audience. What happens when I come in is I help you reframe the work that you're doing so your audience understands how you are making their lives better and how by working with you, they are becoming the masters of their own destiny, and framing that in a really fun and cutesy way. But can you reframe your why as to the why for the audience and how you're actually solving your audience members' pain? There's always ways to do it if you look outside of the confines of your own echo chamber and go towards your audience and go, well, what do you need? What are they actually talking about? Go to Facebook groups if there are any that align with the subject matter area that you're working into. Articles, Facebook groups, Reddit, Quora. There is so much content out there where you can pull from to develop content. It doesn't all just have to actually and even competitors. Look at your competitors. What are they writing about? What has performed well? And what has performed very badly, and then figure out why it was bad and then do a better job. So there's always inspiration out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the core of all of that is basically, what are the questions that you can answer as a brand and what are the problems that you can solve? And keep phrasing it in those ways, right? Like what's the problem I'm solving? What's the question I'm answering for my audience? It's really your why, like you said, and your why is probably something that you have a really good handle on. So when you're sitting there going, oh my God, I have nowhere where to start, just what's the problem? What's the solution? What's the question? What's the answer? You can write it as simply or as convolutedly as possible, but just get that down on paper first. A, that means that the sheet is no longer blank. Huge win, way less intimidating. And B, it's always the place to start because it's the entry point for your audience. They're always looking for their problems to be solved and their questions to be answered.
Absolutely. And to your point, just to get stuff on paper, like just write it out. Whatever ideas come up, it's incredible how much work our subconscious is actually doing too. And I encourage people to take breaks. And ideally, if you need to write something, try to give yourself at least 2 days in advance so that you can just have one day where you're just dumping everything out. And then the next day, you'll be amazed by how much easier it is for you to take all of that and then turn it into something really impactful.
This next question is almost like the continuation. So like, let's say, you've done it, you've gotten past the blank page, and you've got a bunch of complex sort of scattered ideas down. This next question asks, could you share your process to convert complex ideas into clear, engaging, and digestible content for a general public audience? And I know, Mariam, that this is stuff that you do because you work in spaces that, leverage big, sometimes a little bit jargony words, especially in the education space or even in the social advocacy space. And you want to make sure that it's relatable to anybody who's coming across it. So what's your approach for doing that?
Yeah. So again, getting everything out first, getting out all of the ways that the business or the individual is talking about this problem and this pain point or this complex idea. And then ideally, if you have any customer research, whether it's, again, you just looking at the social media platforms where your customers or your audience is engaged and where they're talking about this problem, or if you've actually had conversations with your audience and customers, and then look at how they're talking about the problem in particular. Again, if those two don't align, it's often just because some people might not know the technical term for the problem that you're solving. So even within the realm of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and again, not an expert, have just worked with a bunch of experts in that space. I could talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and how that's really important. And in the art space, for example, the spaces that are often if you're an artist from a historically marginalized group, you will not feel comfortable in traditional art spaces because they represent colonial powers and they other you when you come into that space. So your community won't feel comfortable there. A historically marginalized artist might hear that and be like, first off, I don't like the fact that you're calling me historically marginalized. Like, that doesn't resonate with me. The second thing might be like, I don't really know what you're saying. Like, everything you said, traditional art spaces, what? Colonial, can you break that down? So another way of wording it is, most art galleries don't have a lot of content by artists that aren't white in Canada, for example. If I am an artist that is racialized, or let's say I'm an artist from the queer community too, I might feel like if my art is put into this space, I'm just being put there to like tick a box. And my community, because there haven't been a lot of pieces of art that represent us or that share our stories, or we've been like presented in a way that's been quite exotic by like artists from 100 years ago, we don't feel good presenting our art there. That is a completely different way of describing that problem that might resonate more with the audience. Or if you're talking about dental care and you're talking about a toothpaste and you talk about the fact that it's like chlorine free, or you say, my dad's a dentist, he's going to be very disappointed in me. I don't know what's in it. And you're like, it doesn't have all these things. I would be like, I don't know what that means. But if you just say, this has less chemicals and you are going to only digest natural things that are going to be good for you and still get fresh breath, obviously worded better than that. I swear my writing is better than the way I'm saying this now. That resonates with the audience in a lot easier way. And the last thing I'll say is do the talking test. So after you've written the content out, say it out loud. I'm quite fortunate in this case that I work in a home office. You're looking at my bedroom right now, in a home office right now, because I have the luxury of reading everything out loud all the time. And the only person who can judge me is my cat, who's sleeping on the bed with me all the time. If it doesn't sound like the way you would say this to a friend, then you probably don't want to write that way. Even within the context of business to business, I would challenge folks who say that that might not be the case there, that you just want to speak in a way that's conversational, because that's what's the most engaging to people too.
Oh yeah, especially on the It's a lot of stuff, but like, especially with the business to business, when you're selling business to business, you're selling to the people who work at that business. You're not selling to the corporate entity. So
Yeah,
I totally agree. Same rules apply B2B or B2C. You don't want to get bogged down in the jargon, and don't feel trapped by it either. Don't feel as though that there's no words that capture the detail of a concept other than this really long technical term. Think
absolutely.
about how you would describe it, how you would explain it and talk about it if you were sitting in a room with your target audience. All like the golden rule, I think, across both these questions is like audience first. Is your audience going to like totally turn off the second they hear some, lengthy term, or some complex idea that they can't follow?
Exactly.
Can you position it in a way that they would articulate it themselves? Is this how they would explain their problem and what kind of solution they want? If so, you're probably on the right track in terms of making it clear and engaging and digestible.
Absolutely, Jess. I have to say too, you do such a good job at like summarizing and clearly explaining my like rambles. I did want to add one more thing, and if you have
Please.
one succinct way to reiterate that, that would be fantastic. Yes, you want to write in a way that's like again really clear, easy to explain, simple, but also give room for your audience to not make assumptions, but to infer things from your text too. Which is why you don't need to give every single thing away in your copy. You can have a little bit of fun. You can give them some room to figure out, not to figure out what you're talking about, but do you get what I'm saying? Like we enjoy
Totally.
when we're reading stuff too. Like we enjoy being like, oh, I see what they're saying. They didn't say it exactly, but like
Yeah, bring your audience along for the ride, and make sure that you don't have to spell everything out. You don't have to assume that they're starting from a basis of no knowledge, I think is what's really at the core of it, right? Like that's what keeps it engaging is your audience better than anybody else. If they already know the concept of ESG, for example, which, is an acronym that's pretty lengthy when you spell it all out, and encompasses a whole lot of stuff.
Yep.
Environmental, social, governance, it's an eyes glaze over type of term, but the stuff that it represents is like fundamental for humanity's future. Like we're
Yeah.
talking about climate sustainability and like social repercussions for decades to come. Like this is really big stuff. So don't assume that you have to educate them on, what the term means when you can bypass that point and get into the crux of what you want to talk about, which is how are you helping? What problem are you solving? What question are you answering? Always back to those same kind of key points. So
100%.
it's walking that line between wanting to give your audience the information they need without assuming they have nothing, because they probably don't if they made it this far.
Exactly.
We've got
Well, yet again. Yeah.
Thank you. We've got one last question before we wrap up. How do we suggest to use webinars for content creation? Which I think is a great question, seeing as we're essentially hosting what could be considered a type of webinar right now. So I can start by explaining a little bit. Here's your behind the scenes on studio sessions. I'll let you guys know about how we take content from a presentation like this and transform it. After we do this, we're going to get the downloaded recording of the video, and I'm going to rewatch it at some point. Bear with the sound of my own voice, which you always have to do.
Oh, it's
I'm going to
beautiful.
parse. Oh, thank you. And I'm going to parse all of Mariam's fantastic sort of insights and key quotes, and I'm going to turn that into a blog post. And then I'm going to shorten that even more, pull out maybe 3 of those key things, and I'll make that into a newsletter. And then we'll take that, put it into a sort of graphic carousel type approach, and we'll put that on Instagram. And all of this will drive to the larger blog post where this full-length video will be embedded. So the full webinar or video or what have you is still available and accessible if you wanted to consume the whole thing. But my approach is always assuming no one's ever going to rewatch the video, weeks and weeks later. If you missed it, today, earlier on in the day, but you made time for an hour later, you might rewatch the full thing. But 3 weeks from now, you probably want the highlights. So teasing out the information and crafting it in a way that speaks to exactly what Mariam was talking about earlier, crafting it so that it fits the platform you're promoting it on. TikTok, maybe it's me rehashing live on like a self-shot camera, the top 3 things that we learned from this chat, going to be really different from maybe a more graphic text approach that we might take on Twitter, for example. So again, really pulling out the key insights from that piece of content, and then adapting their presentation to fit all of the social channels that you have, which I'll remind you, should be all of the social channels that you can post on consistently, as Mariam mentioned before. Did you have anything to add on that one?
So I do have, and maybe I can share it with you. And if there's a way to share it with folks, that would be great. I think you covered everything. There's the Market One newsletter, MKT1, which Bella Francis, the managing director, once again, Grow Class at Grow Class, shared with me. And they recently shared a newsletter about how to host. So this is different than the kind of video call that we're hosting right now, but how to host webinars where you're trying to get your audience to engage more actively with you. It lays out some really great tangible tips on how to do that so you can create a warm and inviting atmosphere online. That would be the only other thing. I mean, the webinar itself is also, I would say, one of your greatest opportunities to engage with folks outside of the realm of content creation. This is more like community engagement and community management. So I can forward that your way. And if you folks find it useful, you can share it with everyone too.
Yeah, I think even if you throw it in a comment underneath the, and there it's up on the screen now in case anyone wants to screenshot that. But what you can also do, Miriam, is throw it in a comment afterwards on the page, and people will be able to grab it. But that's great. So big shout out to our moderator who is handling all of the AV for us. We've had 2 more questions come in. I don't want to miss them. So if you've got the time, Miriam, let's dig into them. The first one is just wanting to make sure that they got down the name of the person you mentioned earlier who has that great advice in newsletters, I believe on Twitter. Her name's Amanda.
Natividad. So
Amanda Natividad.
Yeah, exactly. Natividad. Natividad.
Fantastic. Which is really, I mean, when you think about it, an example of the community building and content in action. The more you engage with other people's content and can say their names in these spaces, the better chance that you have that they're saying your name in their spaces. So yeah, just a great kind of example in action here.
Yep.
And I think our last question for the day before I let you go is any advice on handling situations in which the needs of the audience, which we've talked a lot about, differ from the preferences or even the brief of the client? So what do you do when the client doesn't seem to think that their audience needs are what they are? If you have a disagreement, how would you approach that?
Yeah, so handling situation in which the needs of the audience differ from the preferences or brief of the client. Okay, so assuming this is within the context of content marketing. So here we're saying the needs of the audience, so what their problem might be, the reason why they might be seeking the solution out is different to how the client has framed it. That is tricky, but also, well, no, it is a little bit trickier, particularly if you're working as a freelancer. If you're working within the organization, it's a little bit easier because you have more time and the person, your boss, your manager, has a little bit more of a reason to invest in the time to get to know your perspective because they also want your long-term happiness and fulfillment within the role. But as a freelancer too, you have to remember that they are hiring you because you are the expert. So definitely lean into that. I am not saying that that means your response should be, I am the expert, therefore you are wrong and I am right. But nothing convinces people more than numbers and data. So can you actually do a little bit of research, like looking up a keyword that is related to the subject that you're talking about? So let's say that you are vegan and you're looking for, I'm going back to the ice cream thing. I think I just have ice cream on my mind at this point right now. So you're looking for vegan ice cream. And the folks that are, and let's say your client believes that the reason why someone would seek out vegan ice cream is because they want a healthy alternative solution. But you believe, based on not only intuition, but some research that you've done, that the folks who are actually seeking this out aren't doing it for health reasons. They just want a treat that aligns with whatever decisions they've made or whatever decisions they've had to make for their diet. So the idea of framing it as a healthy product wouldn't actually resonate with the audience. How can you prove that? The best way would be if you could get on a few calls with some customers, which does require an extra commitment from the client because then they are trusting you to represent them, which can be difficult if you two have just started working together. And now you're also asking to speak directly with their customers. The other thing would be if you could ask them to share some research about their clients and customers too. That would be a great place to start because if their response is, we don't have any, that actually puts you in a better position to go, okay, well, if you don't have this research, let me do some. And then once you do that research, which again, I would encourage you to go to all social platforms, look up the subject. So look up vegan ice cream And then look up not the most recent, but the top posts that have been shared that are related to that subject. And if you have something like SEM Rush, or oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm forgetting the name of the other one, but it's one that we actually Ahrefs as well too. So anything that can give you access to the search queries. I think Keywords Everywhere is another one too that people are using when they're looking up something like that. So you look up vegan ice cream and you notice that no one has said health in it at all, or healthy vegan ice cream. You can use that data and then bring that back to the client and show that, use that as evidence that you are going in the right direction. The other thing I'd say is that if the client is still standing firm on their position, it is then up to you to decide whether you're going to be comfortable sharing content that you don't think aligns with an audience, because it can reflect poorly on you if you have your name put on it. Or if you want, you can ask to not have your name put on it, which often is the case anyways for a lot of freelance work. And then just have that as an example of copy that you've written, or a piece of audio or video that you've produced, because it can still be great, even if you don't believe that it actually aligns with the audience needs. But I would say research, and ideally leaning into research they have themselves if possible.
Yeah, I totally agree. Our stance at Globe Content Studio is that we are always looking to recommend and not dictate. We know that people are coming to us because they want Globe and Mail style journalism. We know that they're coming to us because we have, demonstrated expertise in the area of content marketing. And so we're hoping that they're coming thinking that we're the experts in this area and can push them in the right direction. But if a client is really digging their heels in, maybe they do have conflicting research to you, right? Like if we go down that path, know that ultimately you're here to help them produce the content that they want to produce, and that you can only do so much to push them in one direction or another. It's always a partnership. It's always a collaboration. So yeah, take every project with a grain of salt in that way. But when it comes to pushing forward those recommendations, exactly as Mariam said, any evidence, any research or insights that you can pull forward is the most impressive way on a client to emphasize your point as being something more than just your personal opinion. We like to try and look at sort of a triad of insights, something that would incorporate first-party data, which maybe would be data from the company, third-party data, which is your social research, social listening, your SEO research, exactly as Mariam mentioned. We're a big SEMrush group here at Globe Content Studio, so big cosign to that. And then also some field research, which exactly, as you said, is the interviews, the really chatting with those vegan ice cream shoppers, and what is it about this ice cream that you can't get enough of? Education and information is always going to be the best things to put in your arsenal when it comes to encouraging and giving advice. Amazing. Thank you so much, Mariam, for taking the time to chat with us today. This was really fantastic, and I really appreciate you going even beyond the time that we'd originally chatted about to answer all of these questions, because we had some fabulous audience participation, and I wanted to make sure we didn't miss anyone. Everyone, you can connect with Mariam on LinkedIn. You can find her at Mariam Zohouri anywhere on LinkedIn, and she's more than happy to make your acquaintance. If you have any questions about the session or the work that we do at Globe Content Studio, you can email us at gcs@globeandmail.com. Don't miss our next episode of Studio Sessions. As I said, this is the first of the latest season, so there's definitely more where this came from. To make sure that you don't miss them, you can follow us on all of our social channels at Globe Content. That's Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and you guessed it, TikTok. You can also subscribe to our newsletter, Studio Vibes, for more behind-the-scenes insight, and you can do that on our website at globecontent.studio/newsletter. Thank you all so much for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, folks. Bye.